Alright, let's get this speculation train going. Was Hunter Thompson a member of the Illuminati? Okay, so the Illuminati did exist, but they were disbanded by the Bavarian government in 1776, and there had been rumors for years and years upon years now about them continuing to operate in secret. The actual theory and what everyone seems to mean when they bring up the Illuminati isn't so much that they think some 200-year-old organization still exists in secret. The theory is more so that a heavily political, seemingly Kabbalist type of secret organization exists and is run by powerful, influential people in the media, in politics, in banking, that's really the theory, is that something like that exists. The theory is that they're either plotting to take over the world and place themselves as the leaders of a new world order, or that they've already done this successfully and every president and prime minister is actually a puppet. I'm one of the ones who would say that if an organization like this existed, then it would likely be that they're plotting a cabal, not that they've already taken over. And the reason for that is because, in my opinion, the actual number of variables and gears involved with controlling the entire planet are way too vast and way too many for a small group of people to really control, even if they're rich. That's just what I think, anyways. But I could be wrong. The people who said the mafia doesn't exist were wrong when that was a conspiracy theory. People who said, Nixon wasn't paying criminals to break into the DNC, they were wrong. So I could be wrong too. However, I'd be willing to bet that I'm not wrong about them being human instead of being space lizards. I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that part. Many celebrities and public figures have been alleged to be members of this, and one of them is the late Hunter Thompson, who as far back as the 1970s wrote about things that are now considered to be related to these Illuminati conspiracies. His book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, for example, details an account of him using a drug made from human adrenaline and actually called adrenochrome in the 1970s, 50 years before QAnon ever went online saying that this was a thing. There's also an excerpt from the book that describes being in a room full of lizard people, but considering that the book itself is actually about a long drug bender that he did in Las Vegas, it's pretty much assumed in the literary community that what he described was actually a hallucination as a result of doing, I think, either mescaline or acid is what he was doing in most of the book. Lots of science fiction, novels and TV shows had lizard people or reptilian people before there was ever a conspiracy. QAnon may very well have read the same book that I read and just, went on the internet saying that they found out it was true or something, or that it was tied to something else, It's possible that those things happened. It's possible Hunter Thompson didn't actually know that this was all true and put it in his book for that reason. So why don't we go ask him? Yeah. So really the question is, what else did Hunter Thompson do that, could give rise to believing he knew about something like this? And keep in mind, considering the anti-authoritarian message that is present in a lot of his books, I'd have a hard time believing that he was an active member of something like this on his own accord. It's possible he was used and didn't know it. It's possible maybe they tried to recruit him and he refused, and that's where some of his erratic behavior came from, supposedly. So I decided to dive in and see what other evidence I could possibly find that might, say one way or the other on this. And that led me to trying to look over his bibliography and some things he did or said in interviews. His first published book was about the Hells Angels, who had surprisingly allowed for him to hang out with them with a tape recorder, knowing they were being recorded and that a journalist was writing about what they did. Very unusual in gang culture. You see, kids, people who commit crimes rationally, that are intelligent and use their brains, they usually avoid being seen doing those crimes, because that can be used as evidence to convict them of crimes. And so smart criminals don't do that. And they sure as fuck don't record themselves doing crimes either. The arrangement seems to have been made through a third party who had been a former member turned journalist, and that might be where the trust came from. However, There had been rumors floating around for years that the Hells Angels had actually filed a lawsuit against Thompson for how they were portrayed in his book. While no such lawsuit actually exists, the origin of that rumor seems to have come from the actual event of Sonny Barger, the acting leader of the Hells Angels, and various others who just relentlessly beat the shit out of him because they didn't like how they were portrayed in the book. There's also an excerpt from the book where he witnesses them beating his wife and dog and then gets beaten up trying to intervene. Yeah, I think his portrayal is accurate in that regard. Sorry, Hells Angels. I can see why you didn't file a lawsuit. If it's true, it's not defamation. Okay, so while they never sued Thompson, they did sue Disney for not so much that they were portrayed in the movie, but that their logo was used by characters in the movie Wild Hogs. And that's... you want to know how that lawsuit ended? The lawsuit was dropped because Disney just agreed to remove all the references to the Hells Angels from the movie. So, okay, so they're smart enough to file lawsuits when they know they can win them. Alright, fair enough. And when they can't take the legal route of a dispute, they can take the illegal route of settling it like they did with Thompson. Okay, that's pretty normal, gang stuff. That experience does seem to have been the trigger for a pretty distinct change, where before he wrote nonfiction, but then later did somewhat investigative journalism and what is now known as Gonzo journalism, where he basically was part of the story when it happened. And much of the information can be presented satirically, which is a pretty sharp deviation from traditional journalism, which is supposed to be objective and not the opinions of the reporter. Okay, that no longer exists, so I kind of respect Gonzo journalism a little more for that reason, I guess. But even that there could technically be argued as a possible connection if the media is truly controlled in the way that it's alleged to be. And I don't actually have a hard time believing this part to be true, because it's actually been a long-standing fact for a very long time that the media actually is controlled by an oligopoly, meaning that the majority market share of the media is owned by 6 companies, and has been for years. In recent years, it's actually gone down to 5 with Disney buying Fox. But But with media moving to the internet, it's more or less the same picture, with a small number of social media and streaming services being the most widely used. According to the government, a market situation such as this is allowed to exist as long as the major companies who control the majority market share are not colluding with each other, or there's no evidence to believe they're colluding with each other. Yeah. You think the owners of all these social media and streaming services don't talk to each other? You don't think they figured out that it's actually better for them if they don't compete with each other and work together on controlling the market? Bullshit! It's worth noting also that Hunter Thompson began writing in this particular style at a time where there was A, no such thing as public access on the internet, and B, only 3 companies that ran television networks. So could this distinct style of journalism have originated as a rebellion against what is now considered something the Illuminati does? Maybe. But at the same time, he would not have actually have to have infiltrated this organization to discover these things. Like, I know this shit. I'm not part of the Illuminati. I'm not, guys. Don't accuse me of that. Another notable example of this is Fear and Loathing on the 1972 campaign trail, where he offered a great deal of commentary on the Democratic National Convention's possible strategies and who might be appointed for the election campaign. He also frequently expresses his disdain for Richard Nixon, which he also does in Fear and Loathing, and he describes Nixon's strategy as something that would be akin to a strategy for playing football. It was frequently regarded as not really being factual, but at the same time being more accurate than what most of the news was actually saying about it. And it was published 2 years before Nixon was exposed in Watergate as paying people to break into the Democratic National Convention to learn their strategy. Now, granted, I know that Hunter Thompson is not the one who exposed that, okay? I'm not saying he is. But, with all these people saying, Matt Groening predicted the future because of something that satirized Donald Trump or, blah, blah, blah. It's interesting that Hunter Thompson satirized something with subject matter very similar to a real-life conspiracy that was exposed a couple years after he wrote it. Granted, that doesn't necessarily mean that he was in or that he knew before he wrote it. It's possible that he was just a really smart, insightful person that chose to do satire instead of trying to report the facts, just like Matt Groening. Another interesting thing he did is that he ran for sheriff in Colorado. Not only did he run, but he almost won, and much of the platform for which he ran was very similar to the anti-authoritarian, counterculture views that you see in many of his books. And many have speculated that Democrats and Republicans actually went together to stop him from winning the election out of fear that this may become the status quo. Okay. A couple of other uncanny things I've noticed about him is his reaction to a movie that was made about him. No, I don't mean Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Yes, I like that movie. Yes, it's good. No, that's not the movie I'm talking about. I'm talking about the movie called Where the Buffalo Roam, starring Bill Murray, where a bizarre footage exists of him at the theater where it was premiered, but like hiding in the shadows somewhere. Most people who comment on that movie, including Thompson and Bill Murray, have all said that Thompson's disdain for the movie came from poor script writing. Thompson claims to have completely signed away any creative rights he may have been able to have for that movie. But he also decided to go move in with Bill Murray for like 2 weeks so that he could live with him and help him prepare for the role. He apparently had been friends with several actors who portrayed him in movies. Bill Murray claims to have met him because he saved him from drowning in a pool when he tried to do a Houdini act in Aspen somewhere, which that sounds true. And Johnny Depp apparently spent his own money, millions of dollars of his own money, to fulfill Hunter Thompson's last wish of having his ashes shot out of a cannon after he died. He also was more heavily interested in politics than a lot of people understand as well. He ran for sheriff's office in Aspen, like I said earlier. Many of the papers he wrote in subsequent years after Fear and Loathing were actually about politics. And in a rare interview, he actually announced wanting to run for president. Alright. He also talked at great length about several known scandals at the time, like Joe Biden, who at the time was kicked from the election because he cheated in law school, George Bush for his role in the Iran-Contra affair, and things like that. So what's the verdict? If the Illuminati is real, is Hunter Thompson or was Hunter Thompson part of it? Well, if he joined the organization in a similar manner that he did with the Hells Angels, he probably learned that it was better to be a little more careful the next time. It's hard to tell considering how much of what he wrote about were all things that you wouldn't have to be an insider to know. So I would argue that he was not, or at the very least, if he was doing so in the hopes of exposing it. It's interesting to me because many of the people who are claim to be or have been part of this are usually public figures in some way. And they're usually assumed to have a fairly large degree of some kind of political power. I've always been, on the side of if something like this existed, it's likely the people who are in the power aren't really in the spotlight. They'd be, in the background, the bureaucracy of it would be my theory on its existence. It's interesting that people suspect a guy who had all these wacky antics and did drugs a lot, It's like, it'd be interesting if that were true. It's a new world order, folks.